Good afternoon to everybody here in Eastern Canada, and good morning to those joining us from the West Coast. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar today, where we're talking about Canada's small business economy, credit trends, and what's next. So within the session here today, we'll be exploring the uneven impact of the pandemic and doing a deep dive into three specific industries: food, construction, and auto. In order to cover these industries and be as informed as possible, today we'll be bringing you experts in those segments. These are passionate, well-informed individuals who will share with you what they see in their day-to-day lives and open your eyes and mind to what we need to really think about as we enter 2022. Small businesses across all industries have really seen a heavily impact through the pandemic, and the federal programs that acted as a lifeline for them have really been phased out or been pivoted. So what we're really trying to get to the bottom of today is, what do we need to know about the past 21 months that will help us inform our risk and marketing strategies in 2022? My name is Jeff Brown, and I'm head of small business strategy and innovation here at Equifax Canada, and I'm genuinely excited about our session here today. Before we get into content, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Sandra Shep, who will be covering a few housekeeping items on the logistics of the webinar, just so we ensure that you have a smooth experience here today. So Sandra, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. Each area within the webinar platform is responsive, so you can maximize or minimize each widget or box based on your viewing needs. Our presenters are on camera in the media player in the middle of your screen. Our slide deck will be showing within this media player today, but we will have some polling questions for you to participate in, which will pop up within the slide widget to the left side of your screen, so watch out for those. There's an Ask a Question widget underneath that, so feel free to enter any questions you may have, and we'll address them throughout our session today. In the event there's too many questions to get through, we'll generate an FAQ document, which we'll send out to you in the coming weeks. Our presentation will be available in the related content widget for downloading shortly on the left as well, and there also will be some other documents you may find pertinent. French materials will be available in the next few days. Bios of our illustrious speakers appear on the right side of your screen. Our webinar today is being recorded, and you will receive the on-demand link via email tomorrow. We have a short survey we'd like you to fill out if you could, and that will automatically pop up at the end of the webinar. You can also access it by clicking on the survey icon on the bottom of your screen as well. To the right of that survey icon is a Contact Us button. Please send us an email if you'd like any other further information, and a team member will be happy to help. Now let's get started. Jeff, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sandra. So we're all in the midst of wrapping up the calendar year, enjoying some holiday cheer, and perhaps even watching some hockey that actually has fans in the crowd now. I still can't believe what a difference having a crowd actually makes to a hockey game. To me, hockey being back was a bit of a signal that life can be a bit closer to normal. Well, at least my definition of normal. Us as consumers now have access to more products and services from businesses again. That is, of course, if the supply chain hasn't completely made a mess of everything. So on that note, let's jump into it and look at an economic update. All right, so a key item we need to mention is that the GDP has yet to reach pre-pandemic levels, but inflation has started to rise. Prior to the pandemic, we saw the consumer price index move in perfect harmony with the GDP. What has ended up happening is that pent-up consumer demand from the pandemic, coupled with a strong housing market, has contributed to a rise in inflation. That spike in consumer price index really took off at the beginning of this year, and it showed no sign of really slowing down. As indicated in the chart on the right, inflation has risen by 4.4% in September of 2021 when compared to last year. While a lot of us are still working from home for the time being, and perhaps not having to stop by the gas station as much, that's probably for the best, as the price of gasoline has seen more than a 30% price increase in the past year alone. Adding to that, transportation, housing, and food, and it's really a good thing we have the panel that we do have here today, as I'm interested to hear about what has really impacted their respective volumes. That being said, as a consumer, these numbers are scary. The amount of burden that these price increases have on a household budget could be downright crippling if these trends continue. Shifting from a consumer view to a small business view, we're seeing a number of signs that give us reasons to believe that small businesses may take longer to recover from the pandemic. When we consider recovery time, we center that conversation around debt burden and capacity, while also comparing kind of an increased cost of labor. The dark and red areas on the chart on the left outline the lack of a particular business size to be able to take on more debt. What this shows us is that the smaller the business, the less flexibility it has to increase its costs and attempt to grow its operations. The predominant number of small businesses in Canada being 20 employees or less, this could really be an impediment to small businesses being successful here in 2022. The chart on the right outlines the number of job vacancies for the same time period over the past 7 years, with an overlay of the average hourly wage offered. While there were over 700,000 job vacancies in Q2 of 2021, it was 26% higher than Q2 in 2019, while the hourly wage increased 7% over that same time period. Ideally, with a reduction in available jobs, the average cost of an hourly wage should decrease and stabilize, or else the debt threshold for small businesses is going to continue to get worse. So while we talk about debt thresholds, it's important to know that this isn't all doom and gloom, and there are signs of hope in key sectors. In this chart, we're looking at sales dollars by industry indexed to the prior to the pandemic. With this, we see obvious drop-offs in dollars spent during the initial waves of the pandemic, with restaurants and service establishments taking a larger dip. However, when you look ahead to Q2 and Q3 of this year, we see there was a resurgence back to near pre-pandemic levels in dollars spent. This is due to pent-up consumer demand, or is it a stabilization? Really, only time's going to tell here over the next few quarters. When we look at retail trade, we see almost a 10% increase in 2021, which could be attributed to that pent-up demand, as it aligns similar to the jumps we see in the restaurant industry. However, we also see steady increases on retail for the entire year, which is extremely promising. So now from a sales view to a credit trends focus, really what impacts has the pandemic, inflation, debt tolerance, and sales volume had on credit behavior? So new credit inquiries continued to remain low, which indicates a long road to recovery. Small businesses need to be spending money to be making money. A reduction in credit applications means that just isn't happening. When we look at the chart on the left, we can be reminded that during the pandemic, the initial few months of the pandemic, lenders and suppliers were constantly trying to understand how lockdowns and subsidies were impacting their portfolios. So an abnormally high number of inquiries were actually happening. When we look at inquiry levels during this year, the year-to-year looks very stark, and that's for two reasons. One is the influx of federal subsidies reducing the need for capital. The second is kind of comparing that to that highly monitored activity of 2020. The chart on the right-hand side shows us that for the most part, all provinces have followed the same inquiry levels, except for Quebec, which has remained 5 to 10 percentage points above the rest of Canada. When reviewing the small business data in preparation for this webinar, this one data element that I found kind of the most intriguing. One of the ways to look at the overall health and state of the small business economy is to look at the number of new businesses that not only have opened up, but are also financially transacting. When looking at this chart, you can see that there are spikes during the end of spring and start of summer of each calendar year. If you compare the number of new businesses that we see in 2021 in comparison to that same time period in 2020, you'll see that we have a noticeable increase this year and are within close distance to pre-pandemic new business levels. Growth in new business has been strong in Alberta and Atlantic Canada. The industries where we're seeing that growth is really in the construction space as well as the service industry. So this really shows that even though it's easy to find stories about businesses closing their doors, the entrepreneurial spirit in Canada is alive and well. So here's yet another good news story. Delinquencies in Canada have dropped significantly during the pandemic. This is a symptom of billions of dollars from the federal government providing subsidies and hitting the small business market. Essentially, the Canadian Emergency Business Account, which is interest-free, were being used to pay down existing debts and maintain strong standing between small businesses and their lenders and suppliers. With $49 billion being given and lent to over 75% of the businesses in Canada, money was flowing to businesses that didn't necessarily need it, but used it to pay off debts. The fact that 30-plus day delinquencies went from 12% down to 8% in a 2-year period is remarkable, and is something we really haven't seen here in the past 5 years. 60-plus day delinquencies dropped from 2.5% during that period, and 90-plus day delinquencies dropped to 1%. Geographically, Atlantic Canada and the Prairies had the highest drop in delinquencies, while Quebec had the least variation. So one key variable that everyone was gravitating towards during the beginning of the pandemic was how many businesses have gone bankrupt. While it would have been nice to look at, it's really a lagging indicator. And there are a series of negative occurrences that really need to be considered prior to looking at the black and white nature of a bankruptcy. We look at delinquencies, collections, legal action, and then bankruptcies in that order, as one is a precursor to the next. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, each phase had a different delay as well. Delinquencies weren't happening because of repapered deals and federal subsidies. Collections weren't happening because collection companies weren't doing outbound calls. And there was minimal legal proceedings as courts were closed for a period of time. So when we look at bankruptcies, we should all expect them to be low, given the nature of what I just mentioned. Given the circumstances that are going on, this is going to be on the uptick. On the right-hand side, it is interesting that the number of collection cases on small businesses has been rising since midway through 2020. When we think back to that negative occurrence credit life cycle, it shouldn't be a surprise that bankruptcies will be shooting back up, not only because of that logjam breaking, but also because of the recent announcements of some of the federal subsidies changing. Some small businesses just won't survive without direct government support. All right, so without any further ado, let's move over to the portion panel of today's discussion where we'll work to understand the path. So I want to start with introducing our panel of experts. So it's my pleasure to first introduce Jennifer Haringa, North American Credit Director at Gordon Food Services. So Jennifer, over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Thanks, Jeff. Exciting to be here today and loved listening to your stats, some pretty interesting things. And I like the idea of that pent-up demand. My name is Jennifer, as Jeff mentioned. I am the North American Director of Credit for Gordon Food Service. I've been with the company 20 years. A little bit about Gordon Food Service, in case you aren't aware. We are a broad-line food service distributor. So we don't just distribute food to restaurants. We have a diversified portfolio, hospitals, nursing homes, oil camps, education. So we run the gamut of extending credit to a variety of customers, which is always makes it fun and interesting.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So next I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Last, who is a National Credit Director who recently retired from his role at Rexel Canada. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience? Jeff, you might be on mute if you're trying to chat here.
Thank you, Jeff. I was recently retired from Rexel, which people out there would probably recognize as Nedco and Westburn, so leaders in the electrical distribution business. And prior to that, I was with Annixter, also another distributor in the electrical distribution business, for 25 years. And we sell to all kinds of customers. The biggest customer segment is contractors, all the way from the giant ones like Ainsworth and State and Black and McDonald, all the way down to the two Bobs in a truck, as well as end users, utilities, and manufacturing companies.
Jeez, so running quite a gambit. I'm sure there's a lot you've seen here during the course of the pandemic and also leading up to it. So thanks so much, Jeff. So last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Cody Green, who is the founder and CEO of Canada Drive. So Cody, over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
You bet, Jeff. Thanks a lot. So Canada Drive's our mission is to be the easiest way to buy or sell a car in Canada, and we're Canada's largest online used car retailer. So what that means is through Canada Drives, Canadians can shop, purchase, and finance a vehicle 100% online and then have that vehicle delivered to their doorstep. And then we back that up with a 7-day love it or return it guarantee. So a bit about the company, we have just under 1,000 employees. We currently operate in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. And every month we're purchasing, reconditioning, and certifying a little over 1,000 vehicles and growing, and then selling them direct to Canadians through our digital platform.
Geez, so you'll have some interesting perspectives here on kind of the digital transformation that small businesses have gone through, that we as consumers have gone through. So really curious to get some of your insights as we dive into it. So what I want to do first is start off talking about the kind of the food service industry. And in order to do that, let's kick it off with a simple polling question. So Sandra, if you could launch the first one. All right. So the first question here is, how often have you dined inside a restaurant in the last 30 days? So answers are, I haven't, 1 to 3 times, or more than 3 times. And we all knew that it was a challenge to even get it to a restaurant last year with everything being shut down. So I'll give you a couple minutes here to start logging in your responses. But obviously it's a sector that has all had some challenges, not only from supply chain but openings. And everybody being very reluctant to kind of go out and venture out at the risk of infections and hurting loved ones. So really curious to see everybody's responses as this comes in. All right, so we take a look at the responses here. The first one, 14% saying I haven't, 1 to 3 with just over kind of 50%. And wow, fairly interesting response. So glad to see that there is some support happening out to restaurants here, especially people who've gone more than 3 times. It's great that you're able to kind of put your budgets towards that and really help a lot of small businesses that have gone through a lot of struggle and a lot of the employees that factor into that as well. All right, so with that, I have a question that I want to kick off over to Jennifer. So Jennifer, since the pandemic started 21 months ago, I think we all as Canadian consumers have realized that food security is a real anxiety. Can you take us back to March 2020 when the pandemic really started to become a reality for us here in Canada? And what did that look like from your company's and your team's point of view?
Yeah, March of 2020 was definitely a major impact, a grind to a halt stop for a significant portion of our customers. And that phrase of in-person dining certainly became I don't want to call it a catchphrase, but it was a reality. When did we ever use in-person dining as on a regular basis prior? So that in-person dining became kind of a mainstay in our credit decisioning, our credit policies, our procedures. The other thing, like I would say for most companies from a credit standpoint, was we pivoted, like everybody else, to a work from home. And for those credit professionals I was one that I didn't think we'd ever be successful to be able to work from home. I thought it would be very difficult to do, and we have not only been successful, but we've exceeded actually in that work from home environment. A big part of it for us as an organization was we thought we were part of the food service or food supply chain. So it was extremely important to us to figure out, how do we work with our customers? We can't just say, you owe us money, we cannot deliver you product. So very quickly, we as a credit team pivoted. As our customers were pivoting to takeout only, we were pivoting to how can we work with our customers even if they still owe us money and they don't have enough money coming in. So it was a true pivot, I would say, on the credit side of the business.
Wow. Yeah. And you just think about it. Some of these restaurants really have, they have to maintain a strong relationship with you, even compared to the relationships with banks, just because if they don't have food coming into their store, they can't go through and put food on plates to get paid. So it's got to be such a challenging dynamic. So with that being said, what's been going on in your customers' minds as the pandemic's unfolded? Are they still being actively supported by the federal government? And what kind of support did your organization have to provide to kind of keep them running and support them?
Yeah, a large part, of the discussions with our customers, whether it be just after the pandemic, still ongoing, is talking about subsidies. We early on organized a team, assembled a team very, very quickly to stay up to speed with those provincial, state, and federal guidelines for support, because they were constantly changing, as you guys may have heard in the news. And it was important for us to stay abreast as well, because we wanted to make sure our customers were informed. So those were part of our everyday discussions. We weren't just calling to find out when we were going to get paid. We were talking to our customers to say, hey, are you aware of this? Are you aware that you can apply for this? Are you aware that this subsidy is available? Now, recently, I think you had mentioned a little bit earlier, funding qualifications have changed and changed pretty significantly. And that is, that's a concern to us. We're concerned. I think you had mentioned this is a tough time of year after the holidays in the restaurant specific industry sometimes. And there's stats out there that basically say 8 out of 10 restaurants will not survive the winter without some type of funding. And we're trying to stay abreast of all of the information that's available and trying to support our customers and get that knowledge base out to them, whether it's through our own webinars, our website, and having our sales and credit teams informed on the funding that's available.
Wow. So you guys really had to be agile as the pandemic unfolded. And I mean, I think we always try to say, hey, the pandemic's closed, we're at our end, but I'm sure with the sense of like, government support is still being provided, and they're going to go through and gauge how things are paid back. So it's going to be a continued evolution. So no, hats off to you and your team for being able to take on some of the challenges you faced.
Thank you.
So you and your credit team have certainly faced some incredible challenges during the pandemic. What elements have been kind of key to survival, success, and pretty much evolving through this?
I think first and foremost for our credit team when this all happened was how can we not only assist our customers in surviving, but also how can we get them to the point of thriving? And, when in-person shut down originally, I think like everybody, we all thought this was going to be a matter of a couple of weeks. And I think most restaurateurs, or hotels, whatever, we all thought it was going to be a couple week pause. Let's pump the brakes for a few weeks. Well, in a lot of our industry and a lot of our customers, even a few week pause could be significantly dramatic to their cash flow changes. So we pivoted very, very quickly. We started the day lockdowns happened, actually the weekend prior, before the formal announcements, we actually created some new scoring, some new modeling for customers. We knew as an organization, when things did start to open back up, we couldn't say, no, we're not extending you credit terms. You still owe us from a couple of months ago. That just wasn't a feasible course of action for us. So a large part of it was who can we continue to extend credit to while working on these pre-COVID balances. And a lot of it was, like I said, staying on top of the financial relief with customers. There were customers that owed us pre-pandemic dollars that we still extended credit terms to, but we also made sure, we were sticking with payment plans with them. And, we're still living in that world. I mean, how many months, almost years actually later, and we're continuing to evolve our modeling to say, we can't just say no to customers. It's how can we work with you? And as I said, not only just survive, but thrive.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, changing a credit model midway through kind of a pandemic, I mean, you do it out of necessity. I'm sure it wasn't necessarily the funnest activity, but at the same time, I mean, it's glad to hear that there's organizations like yours that are going out and extending help and supporting small businesses rather than just seeing them as a line on a balance sheet. So that's really great to hear.
The fastest a credit model has ever been done, I think.
All right, so let's fast forward today. So everybody's supply chain seems to be in every other sentence that we hear in the credit space right now. So have the supply chain dynamics begun to ease from your point of view, or are they still as difficult as they were on day one of the pandemic?
I would actually say supply chain challenges are even more so than they were at the start of the pandemic because they're much broader. Obviously we all recall, the rush on toilet paper, at the beginning of the pandemic and the supply chain challenges that were, but it's an overall concern in our industry, the supply chain challenges. And I won't speak to be an expert by any means on supply chain, but it's worse than it was at the start of the pandemic. And labor shortages certainly are an impact to that, whether it be, in the food plants, getting drivers to pick the product up. I actually myself was listening to a webinar last week saying containers that generally turn from certain parts of the country, on an average, they were turning 5 times, and now during the supply chain challenges, they're turning in that same time frame, instead of 5 times, they're turning. So the products are just not getting to where they need to be. And when they do, we've got those challenges with getting drivers to deliver those products. So it still continues to be a challenge for us and I would say our competitors we're all, unfortunately, all in the same boat right now.
Well, I mean, you add into that, I mean, some of the flooding that's happened on the West Coast and on top of the supply chain issues. I mean, you got to think at some point that it's just going to become easier. But so it's kind of sobering to hear that the supply chain issues are if the same, if not worse, than the start of the pandemic. So no, thank you for sharing that. When we look forward to 2022 and beyond, we have a lot of people in the audience here who are from lenders, from other suppliers. For the food services space, what key indicators are you and your team looking to really gauge for any resurgence that might happen and really getting us back to the old normal?
Yeah, the new norm, right, is what we're going to call it. And I would say we started to see that slight resurgence in our industry, especially as restrictions started to ease in the majority of the country and patio weather, had started to open. And needless to say, I'm not sure, there's many places right now in Canada that are still having patio weather, at least not without a heater. But so I would say we're cautiously optimistic. But the changes in some of the subsidies that have been happening are of a concern to us. As I said to you. So we are continuing to evolve our credit scoring modeling. It's a very nimble tool, which has been phenomenal. We're constantly looking to tweak that to see, as things change, how can we continue to support our customer base. We ourselves, from gauging our key indicators, as a credit professional, it's always going to be those things like DSO, bad debt. Those are key metrics for us and will continue to be key metrics. For us, I'm extremely proud, I would say, and I don't know if we have any GFS folks, credit folks on, but extremely proud of the group and how successful we were in this past year and a half, almost 2 years. So and when I say we're going back to basics, I don't think we ever got away from those basics. We're just tweaking them a little bit, I would say.
Well, on behalf of, us as consumers, we appreciate all the work you guys have done to make sure that the flow of goods still, goes to the restaurants that, more than 50% of us are still going to at least multiple times per month. So, Jennifer, thanks for providing that perspective. And I know Jeff and Cody, a lot of what Jennifer has mentioned probably resonates in the construction space and the auto space, especially on the supply chain side. Kind of any comments or any kind of feedback you have on what Jennifer's mentioned?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely some parallels. Supply chain, and it's been this weird journey we've been on where supply and demand have kind of yo-yoed up and down, and then you've got the production of the goods kind of flowing through. And so I can't speak as much from the credit perspective that she was referencing, but definitely on trying to get the goods to the customers and the challenges we face, I see a lot of parallels.
And Jeff, I can reiterate that too with regard to construction. What I hear throughout my industry counterparts is that the only impediment during the pandemic was supply chain issues.
Nice. No, and so thanks for mentioning that. So I know we've got a lot of material to go through and a lot of insight to gain from construction and auto space. So let's go into construction. So let's kick this off just like we did in the food side. And simple poll question just to kind of kick us off. So Sandra, if you could bring up the one on construction. All right. So this question here is, have you bought or sold a house or undertaken a renovation of over $10,000 during the pandemic? Simple yes or no. I promise this information won't be used and resold to your local contractor or real estate agent. But just basically a curiosity. There's been a lot of drivers that have happened during the pandemic. So really curious to see, you as yourself. Small population side, we've got, a few hundred people on the call here today, but just to kind of kick us off as we dive into the world of construction credit. So Sandra, can we see the results? All right, we're kind of a 50-50 here. So we've got, 40% saying yes, 50% saying no. And so, fairly strong indicator here, but no, I am planning in the near future 5%. So kind of 50-50. When you think about what's going on in the space and the dollars spent around renovating your home or selling your house, who would have thought, like, during a pandemic, if people want to go through and basically pick up and move their lives, so that it's shuffling from living kind of a downtown center to maybe a more rural area, or completely changing your work environment, that people are willing to go through and make these large financial decisions during a pandemic. So Jeff, let's start off. I want to ask you a few questions, just kind of kicks off in the construction space. So the construction industry sure has had an interesting ride over the past year. You know, the cost of lumber is tripled. Companies had to deal with different lockdown protocols across the country. From a credit perspective, has this been kind of a good, bad, or ugly situation? Because I think, you know, outside of looking in, you can kind of view it in multiple different ways.
Well, I want to go back to using Jennifer's format. So I can remember March of 2020, there was, you know, a lot of uncertainty as to what the future was going to hold for us and how it was going to affect us. One of the good things was that from a credit and cash intake point of view, we had structured ourselves so that the migration of working from home was no issue at all. It was completely transparent. So that happened. But I can remember meeting with senior management in March to say, well, what percentage of our customers are going to play the cash strapped hand, and you know, we're unable to get into the office, or we're unable to make a check, whatever the impediments were, how was that going to affect our cash flow? And I can remember that when we got to the end of March, cash flow was right on target. And then the same thing with April. And then as time progressed, cash flow actually increased approximately 20%. And that's a significant number. And so sales through the whole course of the pandemic have been, and again, I talk for the entire electrical distribution industry because I keep in touch with my counterparts, and everybody has the same comment. Cash flow never better, sales never better, the only impediment being supply chain.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the dollars that have been issued out from the federal government, I mean, it's interesting to see kind of where they've dispersed and how people and how small businesses are using them. So it's good to know that there is that support, that there is that uplift for the construction space, that it sounds like it's been a good year. Because I mean, you always hear horror stories, just like in every industry. You hear horror stories about you know, restaurants going under, or construction organizations, you know, committing to work and then taking funds from consumers. So it's good to know that there's a healthy part of the market that can be relied on. So when we talk about construction, obviously, you know, real estate is a big part of that, and hence our question around the poll. So what are the prices and volumes that have been transacting that have happened during this are really, really remarkable. Were there any signs of this coming, and what does this industry face from a supply chain point of view? Could there be any limitations to its growth based on some of the supply chain issues we're seeing?
Well, I see the supply chain issues normalizing sometime mid next year. Other than that, I don't see this as, people in the construction industry are still pretty bullish on, and I see new building permits, I see new construction in Toronto, I see the project throughput at our level in the electrical distribution still being on par or even better than it has been in the past.
Wow. And how does that compare to, I mean, you've been in the electrical distribution construction space for a while. How does this past year compare to what you've seen previously?
You know, and I'm going to go and give you some quotations from our corporate treasurer, who has been with Rexel for going on 30 years. And let me tell you some of the words he uses. Unprecedented, record-setting, achieving numbers we never dreamt were possible. So it has been beyond our wildest expectations.
That's incredible. And I guess that parallels across all parts of the construction industry. It's not just electrical distribution, across everything, I guess.
As far as I can see, yes. I mean, I know it's also very strong in like concrete, and I know plumbing is doing well. So
yeah. Oh, I imagine when we look at that.
I have heard no negative stories from anybody in construction.
That's great to hear. And I guess, just like Jennifer was mentioning to us about working from home, everybody being stuck at home, everybody's looking around, wants to put on a deck and a roof, move, and just, if you're going to be stuck in a location, you might as well kind of boost it up. And I guess that goes for, the provincial and federal government as well. It's a great time to be able to go through and replace infrastructure and invest in projects when you don't have as much traffic on the roads or foot traffic in public places. So.
The one negative story to that point, I knew a number of fellow employees at Rexel who were wanting to, during the course of the pandemic, do modifications and renovations on their vacation property. And that typically involves lumber. And there were some shocks at that point. And I think that affected that industry a bit, but I understand now that lumber has come back to its pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, I mean, it was getting crazy. I mean, you see people stockpiling it, and I remember seeing images online of people putting them in storage containers, and just, you're looking to build a house in the next few years, just buy it when it's cheap. So the federal government's provided a number of programs like on our consumer and small business ecosystem. However, there's some argue that this has also halted some of the potential at the same time. From a labor perspective, what has the construction industry had to deal with during the pandemic?
I don't have a first-hand information on that, but I know that there have been labor issues. I think I mentioned to you that I have some property being built up in vacation country, and I know that labor has been the biggest issue there. Now, it's tough to tell whether that is due to the pandemic requirements of keeping job sites at a percentage of maximum capacity, or whether that has been just the inability to go and get labor. But that, like I said, was in vacation country. Where I live in downtown Toronto, I see the construction projects going up just as quickly as as the pre-pandemic issues. I see the stuff in Liberty Village. I see I think of the well down near Front Street, down near the stadium, was a huge mega project for Toronto, and that's progressing along well. Yes, people are having some labor issues, but I think that's lessening as we go along.
So it's good to hear from a construction point of view as well. When we talked to a few small businesses here, some market research that Equifax was doing, and what we heard from some restaurants was that they actually had to change some of their hours of operation. Rather than doing 5 lunch services throughout the course of the week, they'd have to pare that down because they couldn't get staff, even if you're paying stronger salaries. So I'm sure there's a correlation between people being able to be unserved and also being able to garner higher salaries at other locations. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that in the construction space, but good to know that, with the volume of construction projects that are going on in and across Canada, that, again, labor and the amount of projects and infrastructure seems to be strong. So in terms of, the outlook here, unprecedented record setting in terms of volume, what indicators would you look at to see a potential drop? So, I mean, if you're an investor and you want to go through and put money behind any of these construction companies, what would be a sign that you would take to pull your money out and not invest and not build your credit scorecard accordingly to support? Like, what are some of the negative indicators that you would look for a drop down to normal levels?
The first thing I would look at is gross profit. Yeah, that I believe that's at the top of the chain, and that dictates so much else within these major construction companies. How How lean are they pricing their jobs? I think right now I see great resilience in that area, and the GP levels seem to be very strong. But as you know, in any business cycle, what's going to happen is increased competition. At one time, going into the pandemic, I thought there was too much competition in the construction industry. During the pandemic, that has certainly not been the case, but I fear that may return.
Right. No, that's a good thing to know. I mean, outside of competition, balance sheets of some of these construction companies, what you had mentioned around real estate as well. I mean, I would imagine that if there's a correlation between real estate prices dropping down, volumes decreasing, that the construction industry might start teetering down as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. So Jennifer and Cody, kind of any, I guess, similarities between what you're hearing and what you're seeing? Obviously, it's the other side of the coin to what you mentioned, Jennifer, in terms of, there's tons of profit going on in the construction space. There's obviously a leaner side happening on the food industry, but are there any correlations? In terms of labor, what are some of the stresses that some of the restaurants might be talking about above and beyond just their balance sheets?
Labor. You hit it. I mean, restaurants are still limiting their hours. Restaurants are still limiting the days that they're open, just simply because they cannot get the labor that they have. The other thing, too, just to also point out is, for the first time in my career in credit, even having a challenge getting staff hired from a credit standpoint, because there is a pretty good demand for strong credit professionals. So even when we had postings ourselves to get credit folks on board, we had some challenges in getting people. So it even hit, us as well.
That's good to know. And I'm sure in Cody in the auto space, and we'll probably talk about it here in a minute, but just the increase in pricing. We talk about the real estate market jumping, supply and demand. You got less supply of automobiles on the road. The ones that are available, I'm sure have seen quite a jump as well.
Yeah, I think that's the parallels, is the demand came roaring back and the supply wasn't quite there, and Econ 101 prices are going to rise.
Perfect. All right, so let's take that as a transition over to the auto space, and like we did with food and construction. Sandra, can you load up a polling question we have for auto? All right, so how likely are you to purchase your next car online? Less likely prior to the pandemic, same as to the pandemic, and more likely than prior to the pandemic. So a big part of this as well is, we as consumers, we were forced to do a lot of things online that we didn't normally do. I'd never ordered groceries online before prior to the pandemic, and now it's a routine thing for me. The amount of things that I go through personally to go through and purchase online, that my threshold for spend has increased quite dramatically. So if you're able to kind of just answer here in the survey question, like, again, small population, we won't resell this data to any local dealership or to Cody's organization. But at the same time, just trying to get an understanding and a footing for kind of what your threshold is around spend on a vehicle. So Sandra, can you close up and let's look at the results. All right, same as prior to the pandemic, being 65%, less likely prior to the pandemic, and then we have 17%, well, 18% more likely than prior to the pandemic. So again, we see a bit of a jump compared to what people were going through prior. But at the same time, it's such an interesting model in the auto side in terms of how dealerships operate, how people do spend, how they do their research. I mean, Cody, I'm interested as we go through some of these questions about the types of things that people go through as consumers to research and what their buying habits are. So with that, let's go through and kick it into the first question here. So, I mean, I'll be the first to admit it. I'm a bit of a sucker for new car ads, the design, the capabilities. I mean, the new Ford Bronco, come on, it's absolutely beautiful. However, consumers are stuck. Those who want new vehicles can't get them, or if they can, there's an extra long wait. The pandemic has taken a toll on the auto supply chain, but just how bad is the supply chain right now versus the beginning of the pandemic? So similar question that I asked Jennifer.
Yeah, it's worse, and I'll probably steal Jennifer's format of a timeline of sequencing here to kind of get us to where we are today and maybe where there'll be some reprieve in the future. So a major driver of the problems today, and you probably heard this in the news, is a lack of silicon microchips. You'll see chips, semiconductor chips. These aren't exclusive to vehicles. These are the chips that are used in everything. So toasters, smart TVs, cell phones, they vary in complexity, but they take a while to make, and these plants take a while to build. So even before the pandemic, there was a lot of demand for these microchips. January 2020 comes, some of the Asian plants start shutting down. March 2020 comes, North American shutdowns hit. So auto manufacturers are like, holy smokes, we're going to have a real pullback on demand for new vehicles. Let's cancel our orders for those chips. And they do that. Well, what they didn't expect is the demand to come roaring back. And now they're in back of queue trying to get those chips and playing catch up ever since. And so really when you look back into March and April and even May of 2020, the supply wasn't the issue. There was cars and the demand wasn't quite there yet. People were like, we don't know how the government's going to react. We don't know how the economy is going to react. It's like, I'm going to hold off on those vehicle purchases. But as time went on and people maybe weren't doing that traveling, needed to replace their vehicle, they were driving more often. It was like, okay, I want to look at a new vehicle. And that's where this backlog's really been created. So that's like really honing in on the microchip issue. But there's really been a convergence of issues as well. And so you have the demand for the new vehicles coming back, you have those shortages, but then you have all the shipping disruptions. And a vehicle is a very complex machine. There's thousands of parts and they're coming from so many different places. And so shipping containers stuck off the coast of LA, that might be a critical part for manufacturing. Some parts can only be flown and some can be by truck. And so there's just a lot of things going on that are making it difficult to get vehicles out there. But really the microchips are the one that are causing, I think you hear the stories of trucks to just be sitting there in lots, just ready to go, completely assembled, just waiting for those chips.
Wow. It's crazy that happened. I mean, no way to predict consumer demand on vehicles like this, especially during a pandemic. I mean, who'd have thought it? Again, a lot of us working from home. Who wants to go and necessarily buy a new vehicle if you're not going to be using it as much? But at the same time, I mean, the economy's proven us wrong. I mean, people going through and buying these vehicles, just like the real estate market. People are using this as almost an excuse to go through and alter their lives and their lifestyle because they want the freedoms associated to it. So during the pandemic, consumers have been forced to move a lot of their buying experiences online. What has this meant for the auto industry and the buying process in particular?
Yeah, so I think you said it before, you bought groceries online for the first time. What we're finding is a lot of those changes have proven to be quite durable. So those decisions you made when you were actually really concerned, like, should I be going into a store at all? Well, you found some convenience in those decisions and they've stuck sort of past when those sort of personal safety things aren't as big a concern. In the auto space, like, Canadians were already doing so much online. So they were doing their research. They knew what they wanted to pay for the vehicle. They knew the trim, the model. And if you walk into a lot of dealerships, the customers will know more than the salesperson. Like, they've researched this to a T, especially on new vehicles. What was really lacking was an end-to-end shopping experience for making that online purchase happen. That said, you can't turn on a dime as an industry, and it's not a simple thing to do. So when we looked at our service, we said, okay, there's a bunch of things you have to get right in order to deliver an exceptional online experience. And we see a lot of players in the space sort of moving forward at different increments on them. But I can kind of go through what we believe is necessary to have a successful offering. I think the first thing is information. You need 100% of information to make that decision. So you need the exact price for the vehicle. If a consumer's financing, you need to have all of those details readily available. Same with any optional warranty products. So there can't be any sort of like just-in-time disclosure down at the dealership. They need to be able to make a buying decision online. When you go to used vehicles, you need to get them even more information. So you need to get an inspection report, a Carfax vehicle history report, and you need high quality photos. So a good merchandising system for it. Another thing is there's a big technology piece. Dealerships, OEM websites haven't been set up in the past to do a transaction online, but you need a way for someone to be electronically signing all of those documents that you would have been doing in the dealership. And so that includes like bill of sale, again, all of those finance documents. Another big piece is how do you get that vehicle to the consumer? So what a person doesn't want to do is do all that work online, finish the transaction, and then have to go to the dealership and then spend that 4 to 6 hours that they were going to spend anyways. So Canada Drives, we have over 50 trucks and trailers, and we're delivering our vehicles directly to our customers' doorsteps. And that's how we've solved that problem. But again, a single dealership or even a group of dealerships, that's a pretty step function change and able to put that in place. And then I think the last thing, and we see this whether you're buying a shirt online or is a way to return it. So you can give someone all the information to buy a vehicle, but when it gets in their driveway, if they're like, you know what, the car seat doesn't fit, the hockey bag isn't going in the trunk the way I wanted, or the color's the wrong shade, is a way for them to return it like anything else they're buying online. So we have a 7-day love it or return it guarantee. Again, we see different players in the space sort of picking different things and moving forward. But again, you kind of have to get all of these things right to have a true digital buying experience.
Yeah, thank you for the background as well. I mean, it's funny. You also hear stories in the news. I mean, I guess two things. Real estate agents selling homes. I mean, again, there's been such a lack of inventory. Real estate agents selling homes through virtual tours. Like, again, COVID restrictions, only so many people are allowed to tour through the house. And you basically have to make $1 million decisions without actually physically touching something. So when you compare that to buying a car, which there's only so many makes and models, and there is limited variation between some models and some brands, you would think that's a safer transaction to be able to make than doing something like purchasing a home. So then you tie that in with we've gone through an e-commerce revolution here during the pandemic. Is any small business that was in lockdown basically had to find a way, if they didn't before, to have their services and products sold online. Restaurants, Jennifer, your industry, I'm sure it's a permanent change where restaurants now have a full takeout menu because you have to, because there's that change in consumer demand. So I think everybody who's on the line on kind of even the lender side and even the supplier side is what Cody has mentioned around those buying habits. I think it allows you to take kind of second look at products that you may not have traditionally sold online, that there is a medium, that there's an experience that can be created, and that change in consumer demand and change in small business expectations really warrants it. So Cody, I've got another question for you. So we all know the supply chain has been interrupted for the new car market, but what do you see happening in the ancillary spaces, such as parts and the used car market? Are there any stories you can share as I think about kind of the policy advisors, the lenders and suppliers alike who are wondering how wide that impact really is?
Yeah, so parts and new vehicle manufacturing, like they don't happen in a vacuum to one another. So if capacity is trying to catch up on new cars, a lot of those same resources are used for part production. Fortunately, in the auto space, there's a robust aftermarket ecosystem that can really be leaned on as helping fill that void. That being said, the less new cars being sold, it's pushing out end of life for used vehicles, and that's in turn creating more demand for parts. Like I said, the aftermarket can handle a lot of this, but there's always going to be some parts you need to get direct from the manufacturer. And that's especially true with like very custom and interior components on vehicles. And so it's been interesting to navigate because the constraints don't seem evenly distributed. So we'll have some categories of parts we've had no issues the whole time, and it's been fine. And then one day, block heaters went from being readily available to like, oh, it's 10 weeks. Or even like wiper blades was something we ran into a few weeks back. So it's been kind of, and again, a lot of this isn't just manufacturing. We've talked sort of at length about some of the shipping challenges and where these different things are coming from and what ports they might be leaning on. But I think it's just a reflection of the industry. It's been really leaning on just-in-time production and distribution. And I think that works really well and has worked really well for a long time. It's very efficient. The challenges now is when things get a little bit choppy is you're going to have that choppiness of supply. And so it's our job to make sure that we're navigating that.
Yeah, I mean, pandemic's brought out so many flaws in the way that supply chain works, the way we sell, the way we position, the way we run our daily lives. So no, it's going to be interesting to hear as we get back to, Jennifer, the new normal. But one last question I want to have for you here. So looking forward, just like I asked Jeff and asked Jennifer, are there any indicators that you would consider or want people to watch out for as certain parts of the auto supply chain are recovering? Like what would you monitor to say, hey, consumer demand is going to peak up, or that these parts and new vehicles are going to be in? What are you looking at in particular?
Yeah, I don't see any reprieve coming in the next 6, 9, maybe 12 months. So I think we're probably looking at some volatility through to 2023. A simple answer is when you can walk into a car dealership and buy a new vehicle, and that's any make or brand of car dealership, and buy a new vehicle as opposed to having to wait 3 to 6 months. That would be, I think, like the easiest indication that, okay, this has started to normalize and we're kind of back to where we were. Yeah.
So you anticipate a bit of a dance back and forth until some of these chip orders come through, some of the production levels do come up. I mean, it seems like it's a right time for new brands, new auto manufacturers to come into the market, because that demand has changed. That maybe if you're waiting 3 to 6 months or 3 to 6 weeks for a vehicle, even that you're looking at other options. So it'll be interesting to see as this plays out in the EV market as well. I had a question just as following up to this back to Jeff. So being in the electrical distribution space, what Cody's mentioned around consumer demand and what we've all heard in the news about EVs, from an infrastructure perspective, have you seen any increased volume in terms of projects, product, or that would warrant that, hey, like this EV revolution is here, or or do you believe it's a bit of a media hype to a certain degree?
Wow, that is a tough question to ask. I do see that we are indeed as a country pushing EV, and I see that in our company sells the charging stations for EVs. I see that in new builds, that new builds are putting in the charging stations. But I myself am personally reluctant as a consumer to go the EV route.
Yeah. And
so I must claim prejudice.
Fair enough. And Cody, back to you for the kind of final, before we get to the final wrap up here. In terms of consumer demand, and again, just curiosity trend more than anything else, have you seen an uptake in requests for EVs through your organization?
Definitely. We're exclusively selling used vehicles, and so we're sort of limited on supply of what's already been sold as new. But as you can imagine, early adopters of EV vehicles are also early adopters of buying a car online. So that's an extremely strong segment for us. But we do see some definite regionalization of that. And so like BC and Ontario, BC the strongest, Ontario second of the markets we serve, are definitely a lot more interest than a province like Alberta. They're all going the same direction, but definitely starting from different places.
Interesting. All right, guys, well, thank you very much. So that really brings us to the end of the session here. So on behalf of Equifax Canada, I'd like to extend a great appreciation to our panelists today. And I genuinely enjoyed the dialogue. I mean, a number of items I'll definitely be taking with me forward. So there's definitely a lot to be said about all these industries and their situations and as they evolve. So let's all stay tuned. But if you'd like to hear more about them, I encourage you to connect with our panelists and their respective organizations. So before you log out, like Sandra mentioned off the top, please take the opportunity to fill out the survey. Feel free to share any thoughts on today's webinar, as well as any recommendations on future events. If there's any topics you'd like us to cover or people you'd like us to bring in, we'd love to hear from you. So we've also included a document that's available for download, which was a series of interviews and analysis that we've done on a few small businesses, one of which was a company actually called Bunky Life, who's going to be featured on Dragon's Den here on December 16th. So for all of you who dialed in late or would like to share the session with a friend or colleague, a link to the recording is going to be sent to you within the next 24 hours. And a special thanks to our webinar production team, Stephen, Sandra, Robin, Robert, Subhadeep, for really putting this together. So everybody, thanks again for joining us today, and we genuinely appreciate your time. Thank you.